I'm about to react to a video by Joey from Better Ideas. It's called How Rapid Hair Loss Changed My Life.
So I've had a lot of comments on the channel over the years being like, Joey, you should share your hair loss journey, as if I have some epic tale, a dramatic story arc, infused with life lessons, a coming-of-age tale. But in reality, it's not something I've really thought about much. Hair loss was always in the cards for me.
But you know, the viewers always notice and they always comment on that, even if it has nothing to do with your subject matter. For me, it has a lot to do with the subject matter, so I understand all the comments about my hair loss, but I guess Joey gets it as well.
Growing up, my dad really didn't have much hair, and my two older brothers.
So it looks like Dad has had significant recession and thinning that's occurred. It's hard to see from this kind of low angle, but it looks like he still has some preservation of frontal scalp hair, though of course quite thin, and then he has that standard kind of horseshoe type DHD resistant zone.
Have much hair, and my two older brothers shaved their head due to male pattern baldness when I was around 12 years old. When they did that at the time, I didn't really think much of it.
There's a huge hereditary component to hair loss. It doesn't always follow the father's side, but it seems like the father and the brothers all had significant hair loss.
Growing up, I always looked older than I actually was. Even right now, that fact rings true. I'm 25 years old. A lot of people think I'm like 32. So when I was a kid, I really took pride in the fact that I looked older than I am. That way I could boss other kids around and seem like an adult before I actually was.
See, with my bald head, people still think I look very young.
So when I was 16 years old, my barber told me, hey, you're starting to lose your hair. I kind of freaked out in terms.
Yeah, barbers are sometimes the first people to recognize that there are signs of hair loss, especially when it's occurring more along the crown area, because people just don't see. And a lot of times other people might notice it, but they don't point it out. But a barber that you're going to, say, every few weeks is very intimately involved with your hair, and they'll usually be the first to point out that, hey, they're seeing some signs of hair loss.
Internally. It's like the SpongeBob meme where he's calm on the surface, but internally losing his. And I was like, you know what? This is kind of a bummer. Now I'm gonna look really old. Like I'm gonna look 40 when I'm 17.
You can see that there definitely are signs of some frontotemporal recession. Otherwise, the hair still looks quite dense, but it's the early signs of male pattern hair loss.
But I didn't really do anything about it. I started to notice that my hair was starting to recede at the temples, but it was
It's temples, but it's also that frontotemporal area that tends to recede. You know, most of the time people just don't really think too much about it. They notice some changes, and it can happen in your late teenage years. They just don't really think that, you know, it's going to get much worse, and then it does.
Low enough that I didn't feel the need to do anything about it. I was just hoping and praying that my hair might last me somewhat into university.
Positive thinking. That's a good start. We just launched a weekly newsletter called Hairlines. You can subscribe by going to hairlinesnews.com. It's also going to be linked to the description of all of our hair videos, and let's make it happen.
We should probably just fast forward to photos of me when I'm 18 years old. This is sort of high school graduation territory. You can start to see that I'm receding at the temples.
About a Norwood 2 at this point.
So into university, you can see that my hair, it's still there, you know,
Definitely nearing a Norwood 3 at this point.
It's still fairly thick on top, but definitely lots more temple.
And you can see as the temples start to recede more posteriorly, there's just this reduction of the framing of the face, and that really starts to change just how you view the person's face when you just take a look at them.
I didn't. I was in denial. I just said, you know what? I don't want to worry about it. I don't really care that much. But I think I did care. It did affect me, and we'll get into that a little bit later. You can already see by the end of my first year, there's a lot of temple there. And I don't know what I was doing with my hair at the time, but it was not doing me any favors. I was slicking that right back, kind of curling it back. You could tell, this man.
Some people actually comb the hair from the sides forward to try to close down some of that corner loss that occurs.
I'm starting to keep my hair shorter on top because I noticed it would just draw a little bit less attention to the fact that I was balding. And I would keep my hair very short on the sides as well, just trying to do some techniques that didn't look absolutely.
Yeah, it's very common for patients to sport shorter hairstyles on the sides and the back in favor of longer hair up on top and in the front to, again, give the illusion of less hair loss.
Ridiculous. I didn't want to look like I was trying to hide the fact that I had a receding hairline. I kind of wanted it just to look clean and out of the way. But then it got worse. And obviously, that's what happens with male pattern baldness. It doesn't just get better. So here's me playing piano.
It doesn't get better, but there are times when it just stabilizes. And in some patients, usually the worst of it is in your 20s and early 30s. And then for many patients, there is the stability phase, and it might continue to progress, but at much slower rates than it does when you're younger.
It was starting to do that weird androgenic alopecia thing where it was starting to get thicker on the sides, like right around the ears, and then kind of getting a little bit puby on top. Sorry, Mom. It just wasn't a very good look. It just didn't look fresh.
It's that middle ground that really frustrates people. I think once you make that decision to fully go bald, you get rid of that in-between state of almost being in limbo. That is the most uncomfortable, I think, place for people. And I remember when I was experiencing my alopecia areata hair loss, which definitely occurred on a much more rapid scale than androgenic alopecia, I always felt that when it was like I sort of had hair, but like it was super thin, that was the most uncomfortable. And once you make the decision to either try to do something to fully restore your hair or get it back to the most optimal, realistic place it could be, versus deciding to shave, then things basically start to improve, and I think your psyche starts to process it better.
Wasn't the best version of what I could be doing. And here's the weird thing psychologically as to why I didn't shave my head. It wasn't because I wasn't aware of the fact that I would probably look better if I just bit the bullet and shaved my head, but it was just the fact that I had lived my whole life with hair, and it was almost like I didn't want to say goodbye. I attached a part of my identity to my hair. I almost felt like I wasn't.
So I'm not sure if he's going to get into this, but it would be nice to also hear him at least bring up the idea of hair restoration. And I think it's important to just acknowledge it as like that it's in existence and that there are people like myself who are involved in that field and get to help a lot of patients out who don't want to shave their head, but they're looking to restore what they used to have.
You're kind of at a crossroads. Do I just let go of my hair as a variable in my life? Or do I continue to hold on to it for whatever it's worth, despite the fact that it's not serving me anymore? But I pressed on for at least another year.
Or do you consider hair restoration, right? I think that's the third option that's worth discussing. But of course, if you don't want to take medical therapy of any kind, if you don't want to accept that as part of the treatment regimen, and you are not interested in getting any kind of surgery for your hair, then sure, you need to decide whether or not you just sport what you got or cut it all off.
This was when it really started to just not look so good. I definitely have this sort of like bowl-shaped thing going on my head, 2 semicircles, and from the top it was starting to thin, right on the crown. So here's the year before I shaved my head.
Many times when people do hair transplant surgery, the temples aren't really taken into consideration, meaning that the frontotemporal angles are improved and this part is brought down, but usually the temples are, I don't know, it's like the bastard child. It's like just not really addressed or brought into the picture. And oftentimes that will affect the overall framing of the face. So we try in our clinic to really emphasize the temples whenever it's feasible to do that and whenever it is warranted to try to augment the temples.
Here's a funny thing about Daniel is actually he was starting to recede here, but he actually did something about it. And now he has sort of, more hair, like way more hair than he did when he was losing it. That's what happens when you're proactive. So good on Daniel for not denying reality.
What did Daniel do? Are we going to get into that? We'll see.
So he can improve upon it. Either way, my hair's really looking rough at this point. It's definitely like an advance.
So he said that Daniel was proactive, but we're not clear yet what Daniel did. Now, my guess is that Daniel probably explored medical therapy options, hair transplant surgery, and most likely, did that to help restore his hair.
Advanced Jude Law look, and I don't have Jude Law's face, so it doesn't work as well for me as it does for him. So at the end of my 4th year, the summer between 4th and 5th year, I finally bit the bullet and I shaved it off.
All right.
right, let's film this video. So I shaved my head. I think it looks a lot better, to be honest. I was really postponing that. My hairline was like, well, I mean, you can see where my hairline is, and then I had like a little bit of hair kind of like, did I do?
So he's still a Norwood 3, but he has that frontal thinning. That forelock is starting to thin quite a bit. So initially, when this was quite full, he was still able to, rock the longer hair and everything seemed okay. But as you start to thin at that frontal forelock, then that's when things start to not look as impressive with the hair.
Do this with, and then you turn my head, it'd be all thin up here. Looks like I'm not trying to hide anything. Anyways,
and he's starting to have some crown thinning as well.
Sent some photos to my friends and family being like, yo, look, I shaved my head. And they're like, looks good, dude. That's it. I met with some friends that summer and they'd be like, oh, you shaved your head. I'm like, yeah. They're like, yeah, it looks good, man. That's it. All that buildup for, 22 years or whatever it was led to the reaction of people being like, oh, looks good.
If somebody starts to treat you differently because you shaved your head, you probably don't want to interact or have anything to do with that person. If it was a friend, definitely not a true friend. If it was a girlfriend that then dumps you, you don't want that girl. The people who are actually real friends and real important people in your life are not going to treat you differently because you don't have hair anymore. So that's an important life lesson, I think.
Since shaving my head, I feel like I have actually gotten more confident, especially when meeting strangers. And it's totally a subconscious thing because I don't have to think about the fact that I have an incomplete hairline. I don't have a hairline anymore. I literally can't have a bad hair day. I can also walk faster because I'm more aerodynamic.
I've spoken to some of the benefits of not having hair. Drying faster, after a shower is a huge plus, and not having to buy some of the hair products. There are definitely benefits, right? But not everyone can psychologically handle not having hair. I think for a lot of people, it's tied to their identity. It's tied to how they present themselves to the world. They don't really want to get the ridicule or the comments that, some people will bring. So I still think that, people ought to explore hair restoration options at the right time, whenever they feel ready for it, to at least find out what your options are. Doesn't mean that everyone should be getting a hair transplant when they're young, but it's just about, kind of exploring what your options are and talking to the right people.
No one really thinks about you nearly as much as you think about yourself. Not even close. Most people, most of the time, are not thinking about you. And that might be a little bit of a hit to the ego, but it's the truth.
Yeah, most people are more concerned about themselves than they are with other people. I think that's usually healthier, right? You don't want someone who's super obsessed with you. I think that would be kind of creepy.
Most people are mostly thinking about themselves. So to think that people are like sitting down at a Christmas dinner thinking about Joey's hairline is such a joke. But that's how our brain, we always think that's gonna happen. The same could be said not just about hair loss, but about a mole that you happen to have on your upper lip.
Cosmetic surgery is interesting. No one needs it, but a lot of people want it. And the question is why? Like, what does it matter? Who cares? Just accept yourself. And I think cosmetic surgery has its place, but it doesn't, supersede somebody just having solid self-acceptance and going through life not caring as much what other people think about them. I want to thank Joey for talking about his hair loss, and if you want to learn more, check out our other videos on the channel.